Girls. The First World War. It was a case of incompetent generals, wasn't it? Totally useless. Loads of brave men being sent to their death, walking across no man's land, getting mowed down by machine gun fire. Correct?
Yes, Master. We have heard this before. It is lions laid by the donkeys. Yeah, I quite like donkeys. You wouldn't be asking us if you agree with that, Master, though, would you?
Indeed, I wouldn't. But Siegfried Sassoon was there, the great poet, and he wrote the poem called The General, which I'll read to you. Good morning, the General said, when we met him last week on our way to the line. Now the soldiers he smiled at are most of them dead, and we're cursing his staff for incompetent swine. He's a cheery old card, grunted Harry's Jack, as they slogged up to Arras with rifle and pack. But he did for them both, with his plan of attack.
Oh, so Master Sassoon agrees.
He does. Was that the case, though? No, we're fighting against a sophisticated European army, okay? Have we been fighting those before?
We had, Master. We fought them in the Boer War.
Okay, yeah, the Boer War, late 1800s to 1901. We did fight against Boers who, rather amusingly, we'd paid for their weaponry because we'd lost a lawsuit against them and given them a load of money in a payment previously. Hence, they could buy modern weaponry. And actually, if you look at photos of the Boer War, you'll see they look very much like World War One. With mass casualties, dead in trenches. So, yeah, okay, we should have known better. But the reality was that these generals, Sir John French was old and incompetent, I'll give you that much.
Sir John French was useless.
He was pretty useless. But very soon he was got rid of. We got in Douglas Haig. And we had other generals like Hunter-Weston, famous from Gallipoli and so on. Rawlinson, for example. And these generals, have they had a lifetime of experience of war?
They had, Master. They had a lifetime of experience in the war.
They had, but it wasn't fighting sophisticated European enemies. It was fighting against natives primarily.
Oh, you mean the ones armed with deadly sharpened melons?
I do, yeah. So the Zulu War and things like this, they were promoted extremely rapidly, all right, these generals. Many of them had not really received the training at divisional level and then promoted, into further up the chain. Ultimately, they hadn't worked their way through the ranks, is what I'm saying. They were promoted fast. And so, when it came to battles like on the 1st of July at the Somme, they honestly didn't know. They didn't know any better. They assumed that firing off shrapnel shells would cut through the wire. They thought that would decimate the German lines. They thought it would be a walkover. But did the troops think that? Were the troops naive, thinking they could just wander over, kicking a football or something?
Master, we've seen the footage on YouTube, and that's not the case.
Yeah, if we look at that, you can find it on YouTube. The sunken lane, not too far down from the monument, the great monument at Thiepval, if you pronounce it on the Somme. They've had lip readers. It was a Lancashire regiment, so they had to get lip readers in that were skilled in the Lancashire dialect or accent. Apparently it makes a difference if you're a lip reader. Because back then, we didn't have sound on the video. We've only got the video footage from that sunken lane on that day, the 1st of July. Were they, laughing and joking with the cameraman?
Master, they were rude to him.
Yeah, they're all there swearing at the camera and telling him to, go away in polite language. But they weren't using polite language. They knew that they were going out into a treacherous, dangerous area, and they could well lose their lives on that day. And that's why they were swearing at the cameraman, telling him to go away. And he did, in fact, go away. He made his way back through the mist. The sunken lane there on the Somme is sort of halfway out into no man's land. So they're already positioned well out into no man's land. And what should that tell you, girls?
They knew they should be halfway across to rush the German lines and give them half a chance of success.
Exactly. So they're already in the sunken lane because they knew if they could sneak out further during the barrage, they had more chance of success. But unfortunately, at that time, we did not understand combined arms warfare. We didn't have long-range artillery pieces. We didn't understand counter-battery fire. We didn't understand counter-machine gun fire. But what happened toward the end of the Battle of the Somme? Yes, we lost 20,000 dead on the first day. 20,000 casualties in the first hour. That was a terrible loss. But what happened after that?
We forget about this, Master. After that, we did waltz across no man's land and send the Hun to flight.
I wouldn't call them that, but yeah, ultimately the Germans had to withdraw. They were suffering too much pressure from the British, the French, and the expeditionary, the imperial forces on the Somme, and they were forced back. They had to go back to more defensible lines. So it wasn't the case. And interestingly, this brings up the issue of the footballs. Do you know anything about that, girls?
I've heard we kicked the football over for a larf and a joke, because it was going to be a walkover.
That is the common myth, isn't it? That they kicked over footballs. They walked forward, kicking a football, because they thought the artillery had done the job, cut the wire, killed the Germans. We just walk into their lines. Absolute rubbish. The footballs, actually, there were some footballs there on the Somme. It was a way of distracting the men from what was going to happen. One of the lieutenants, young lieutenant, I forget his name, but one of the lieutenants straight out of Oxford or Cambridge said to his commanding officer, would you mind if we had a couple of footballs? Because I think when I charge forward, I'm worried the men aren't going to follow. But if we say, look, we boot the football forward, we chase the football, it's a way of getting us to dash across no man's land. It's a way of getting the men to follow, and it will distract them. We can write messages on it beforehand and stuff. And one of the funniest messages that was written on one of those footballs, do you know what it was? It was a Staffordshire regiment.
Yeah. No referee!
That was one of the messages, no referee, yeah. Which I thought was amusing. And that was why they did it. And so ultimately, it was bought at great cost. These were volunteer soldiers, they were not skillful. But come the end of the war, what have we done?
Oh, you're going to talk about massed artillery fire and combined arms warfare.
Exactly. So by the end of the war, we had much longer range artillery, far more of the artillery. We'd recognised that was the queen of the battlefield by this point. And we were letting the artillery do the work. And the Germans couldn't match the Empire and America, France, Italy, all these countries in terms of industrial production. Massed artillery fire. Where the Germans had stormtroopers, we also were doing similar things, little squads of troops going out in arrowhead formations across no man's land, ducking in and out of shell holes, armed with Lewis guns, countering machine guns. But we also had heavy machine guns further back, countering the machine guns. And what else do we have?
You're going to talk about air superiority.
We had air supremacy by the 100 days at the end of World War One. So we could go out there with, we could direct the artillery fire and make sure that it was on point. We could also use reconnaissance to point out machine gun nests, strong points, Schwerpunkts, as the Germans like to call them, these kinds of things, artillery pieces, and ensure that we could counter the German artillery and put the gunners to flight, if not destroy the guns, counter the machine gun nests. And this is why, at this point, we were able to roll back the Germans. Yes, they had a lot of success in Operation Michael. They forced us back, I think, 30 miles or so with Operation Michael, that offensive. Because why did the Germans suddenly have a load of spare troops? They could mount this massive offensive in the west.
Russia has surrendered, Master.
The Russians had indeed surrendered, so they could bring over a load of troops, and they wanted to get them in before the Americans arrived as well. Did the Americans win World War One?
Yes and no, Master. Yeah, probably yes.
No. The British Empire amassed 10 million troops in World War One. The Americans managed 1.3 million, which is a lot, but it's not 10 million. So the American effect, if any, was to stimulate, to cause that attack, Operation Michael in April of 1918, which spent the last reserves of the German troops. And then 100 days rolled them back with air supremacy, with all the things I've said. And it was a great victory, as I say, probably the greatest victory in the history of the British Empire. Was it lions led by donkeys?
No, Master.
And in fact, if they'd still been alive and we could have rolled them out, these generals like Haig and Hunter-Weston and Rawlinson, if we could have rolled those out in World War II, we'd have done a hell of a lot better. Because sadly, in World War II, between 39 and 42, we were still relearning all the lessons of World War I, basically. We'd regressed. We didn't understand combined arms warfare. You read about our adventures in the desert against the Italians, great success against them, because they didn't really want to fight, but against the Germans, getting routed constantly by Rommel and so on. And the reason was, we had... Well, we won't go into all of it now. We'll do that for another video. But when they finally come the end of 42, around El Alamein and Montgomery's arrival, when they start combining the artillery and ensuring that they attack on one specific point with heavy artillery, with all of the batteries in one place concentrated, you could punch a hole through the German line and you could get around them. Before that, it was piecemeal. It was spread across the line. It was ineffective. And the generals of World War I could have told them that in a heartbeat. But, unfortunately, the army had regressed at that point. But anyway, yeah, it wasn't lions led by donkeys. It was intelligent men who had ill-trained troops fighting against a very sophisticated, very well-trained enemy, and they had to learn fast.
They had to learn fast, Master. And did they do that?
Well, it costs a hell of a lot of dead people, so I don't know. But they did learn, and they did win,